Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tony the Mole Adams YouTube channel. Thanks for watching every week. We're back again. And last week we were a little bit down because I think Ian Heads had died not long before. And unfortunately, this week we've got a terrible one. A fellow who we've lost far too early, only 52 years old, Tony, Terry Hill. It's a shock, isn't it? We're all are still kind of digesting the news.
Yeah, it happened in the Philippines, Steve, and so details are still a bit sketchy. But the news only broke a few hours before you and I started chatting here, and I've done a tribute to him, speaking to a lot of his former teammates, coaches, guys like Craig Coleman, Brad Fittler, Tim Sheens, and just all in disbelief because he wasn't just a great footballer, Terry Hill. He was a real character of the game. And in an era where there's not a lot of characters, he was certainly one who was very lively. He loved the sledge. I spoke to Beaver Menzies. He said he was probably the best sledger he'd ever seen. And Beaver was around longer than most. I think he played about 15 years in both hemispheres. So it sums up Terry Hill, a real character on and off the field and taken far too soon.
Yeah, he probably dropped out of the media spotlight maybe the last 15 years. But I've got to say, I always thought he'd be back. I always thought that his personality would probably lead him back into being on our TV screens or radio if he so choose. He obviously had other things going on in his life. He's going backwards and forwards to the Philippines and apparently doing a lot of charity work. I been a little bit focused on the '94 Kangaroo Tour recently, not as much as I should have been, having said that I was going to do a book on it. And he's the first player from the 1994 Kangaroo Tour we've lost. The coach, Bob Fulton, one of the managers, Ron Wilkinson, and the sheriff, Brian Hollis, and two of our colleagues, Peter Flamingos and Paul Malone, who were on that tour, aren't around anymore, sadly. But you know, in most cases, they're a little bit older than the players, or a lot older than the players. So to lose the first player and a guy who played the following year in the World Cup final as well, yeah, it's shocking.
Yeah, and 52, ironically, the same age we lost Shane Warne. And, his death was obviously big in news around the world, but similar disbelief, a real character on and off the field. Quite a lot of similarities between the two of them. They were real larrikins. Had some people didn't like what they do, but most fans loved them because they expressed their opinions. And yeah, it's a really sad day, and it's still sinking in for a lot of people.
There's a serious side to Terry too. If he was angry with you, you knew. I know that definitely. He also was involved in sort of bringing down the draft. Don't forget in rugby league. So and the one thing that he got upset with me about was to suggest that he changed his view on the draft or that his view was other than it was, and he certainly wasn't happy with that. So perhaps we don't think of him in those terms as sort of having some convictions that he stuck by and fought for. We just kind of think of him maybe as being an entertainer and a sledger, but he was a little more complex, I think, as a guy, and had a little more depth to him than maybe the average fan thinks or saw. But anyway, we will move on with your column, which maybe would have been the most recent thing you wrote had this terrible news not come through, and that's the Mole Midweek Scoops. And I was pleased to be able to help you with your lead this week because I listened to a great interview on the BBC Rugby League podcast with Lee Briers, who's the assistant at Brisbane. And you know what I'm going to do? Aside from linking to your column in the show notes, I'll link to that podcast that Tanya Arnold did because it's a fantastic interview. But I brought your attention to it because I thought the things that Lee said about Reece Walsh were interesting.
Yeah, that's right. And people often ask me where I get my stories from. Well, this one came straight from Steve Mascott, and
Well,
it was a fascinating insight from Lee Briers. You're right. Well, what he basically said was that they're trying to slow Reece Walsh down a little bit. and it sort of doesn't make any sense until you look at the stats. And while he was brilliant last year, he also made more errors than any player in the NRL. And so Lee sort of assessed his game and rightly said he does everything at 100 miles an hour. And as a result, he tries things. When they work, they're brilliant, but there are times when it doesn't work and it doesn't look quite so good. So they just want to pull him back a little bit. Obviously, keep the brilliance, but just slow it down a little bit so he's got a little bit more time to make his decisions and hopefully make less errors. And I've never heard of this in football, and you probably haven't either, Steve. A player told to really tone it down a little bit and slow his game down so he plays a more controlled game with less mistakes. Quite interesting.
Yeah, well, I think I can kind of understand what Lee meant when he said that as you get older, the game slows down a bit. You're less, in a hurry because you know what's going to happen. So you got more time to think. And clearly, because Reece isn't very old, he kind of is in a hurry. And then like a lot of people in a lot of walks of life, whatever they want to do in their lives, they're kind of a little more pushy and a little more tense and a little more, and every small thing worries them. And so I think that's understandable, and I think it's just maybe trying to impart a little bit of experience, like telling someone you'll regret that you'll regret that final beer. You'll regret spending that money. You'll regret going on that trip. Or you regret staying home. I think it's kind of like that. It's just trying to impart a little bit of experience. Now a lot of rugby league expansionists watch the show, Tony. And you've got a bit more news on the Fiji NRL bid.
Yeah, that's right. And I think PNG are still the hot favourites to get the 18th franchise. A lot of it to do with political reasons and China, which we've discussed before. But Fiji are really ramping up their bid. And one thing they've offering the NRL, and it's something no other club in the NRL has, and I imagine no club in Super League has, and that's a retractable roof stadium. So they're going very high tech. And when you think of the weather in Fiji, it's very tropical. When it rains, it pours. So retractable roof could be a very handy little item. We're talking hundreds of millions of dollars, but the Fiji government is keen to see this franchise happen, and they're providing massive tax breaks for investors, and a multinational firms put its hand up. So watch your space. Could be very interesting.
The NFL superstar Jordan Mailata is back in town, is he? Is that right?
Yeah. He's been in Oz this week. It's obviously off season over in the NFL, and he's here and back in Bulldog territory. He's actually a Bulldogs junior, even though he played his limited junior league football at South Sydney. He started off for the Bulldogs, and he was here promoting a version of NFL flag football, which is kind of like OzTag, and apparently the NFL is keen to take this around the world. It's a less physical form of the sport, as OzTag is to rugby league. And the word is 150 kids turned up. They were just absolutely starstruck by this giant man who's on $100 million, if you don't mind. And he's posed for a lot of selfies, signed autographs. So these kids from the Bankstown Bulls are in heaven.
Finally, Drew Hutchison from the Bulldogs booed off last weekend. How has he sort of handled that?
Yeah, well, I imagine he wasn't very happy, but the good news is that it was a small minority of Bulldogs fans, and a lot of Bulldogs fan pages and the like that I saw have all gone in the bat for him. And look, he's not a world beater, we know that. He's probably not a specialist halfback, but he's in there doing his best, and he was replaced late in the game, and it was a game that the Bulldogs won fairly comfortably against the Knights. So it's obviously a tough school for some of these Bulldogs fans that they boo one of their own players after a win. So they were certainly put in their place by the majority of Bulldogs fans. And I just wanted him to see, and also the so-called supporters that this sort of thing just should not happen and isn't on.
Good on you, Tony. It's been a pleasure. A sad day though again for us, but we want to thank all the viewers for tuning in once more, and we'll be back next week.
Sounds good. Hopefully with some more good news rather than starting on such a sad note.